Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Weaver. Welcome to the Audio Analyst. Pardon me. Before I get into today's discussion, I want to thank all my current subscribers and remind new viewers that if you are enjoying these conversations, if you find any merit or value in the information I'm sharing here, please be sure to subscribe, like, and share links to your favorite episodes with your friends. And please leave your comments and questions. I love hearing from you guys. Should you wish to take a more active role in supporting the channel, and in the process receive exclusive access and content, I hope you will consider becoming a patron. You will find a wide range of Patreon subscription levels available to meet any budget or level of generosity. And if a one-time donation makes more sense for you using Patreon, PayPal, or Venmo, I've provided the necessary information in the comments section. Please understand that your support at any level ensures the continued production of these conversations and is most sincerely appreciated. Now, across my 50 years in and around this industry, I was selling stereo gear before I had my driver's license. Virtually everyone I've run across who is truly passionate about this hobby and the industry can point to some event or events that shaped their journey, experiences that permanently ignited their love of and fascination with the audio gear we necessarily must use to recreate music in our homes or private listening spaces. Now, for me, two experiences over the summer after I graduated high school in 1973 served to ignite this fascination, stirring up an enchantment within me that has never once dwindled, faltered, or weakened. The first came that June when a schoolmate friend of mine, John, you know who you are, invited me over to hear his brand new system. He had just purchased the flagship British Industry Corporation's BIC 980 belt-driven turntable. Keep in mind, this was a time when almost every turntable came with its own tone arm and captured cables. But this 980 was fitted with a Shure V15 Type 3 cartridge, which had just come on the market that month, and claimed to be the best tracking cartridge ever made. His electronics were even more amazing, as he had Bob Carver's game-changing and brand new phase linear 4000 preamplifier and 700B stereo amplifier. When I had the pleasure of interviewing Bob while writing his profile and industry history for the 2015 book, The Absolute Sound's Illustrated History of High-End Audio, Volume 2, Electronics, he spoke at length about the 4000 and what served to make it unique. The 4000 featured an early noise reduction system, the autocorrelator, combined with a dynamic range expander named a peak unlimiter. Now, the noise reduction system was much different from the Dolby system in that it didn't require an encode-decode process. It was a one-pass system. And though the dynamic range expander had no effect through the vast portion of the dynamic range, at the very upper end, it would increase the output by about 1.5 dB on impulse transients. At the very bottom end, it would reduce the gain about 5 dB, which Bob claimed increased the dynamic range a little over 6 decibels, which is twice as loud. Regardless, it made a big difference, and combined with the autocorrelator, it was a very cool listening experience. The 700B amplifier was a reworking of the original 700, still offering a staggering 350 watts per channel. Guys, you have to understand, the average high-powered amplifier in 1973 offered 80 to 85 watts per channel, with the next closest contender to the phase linear, the Crown DC 300, providing an often unstable 150 watts per channel. Now, John's speakers were the new Epicure Products Incorporated Model 400, called the Mini Tower, as they were just one step down from EPI's flagship 6.5-foot tall, 180-pound, $2,000 a pair EPI 1000s, designed by Winslow Burho. Both sets of speakers were omnidirectional, but the 400s stood a much less imposing 3 feet 2 inches tall, were 14 inches on a side, and had a 6-inch woofer and a 1-inch inverted dome tweeter on all 4 sides. I have never forgotten hearing the Styx 45 RPM single of Lady, with its crushing bass line, played at rock concert levels, and seeing dust shaken loose from the ceiling fixtures. Guys, it was more than merely ear-opening. It was the first time I heard a stereo even come close to approximating what I heard at a concert, and it changed forever what I expected from my audio gear. Needless to say, I accepted every invitation John extended to come over to his place and listen to records. Bands like Pink Floyd, Frank Zappa, Blue Oyster Cult, the Climax Blues Band, and the James Gang were in heavy rotation. And interestingly, I've recently reconnected with John through Facebook, and I've learned that he still has his original phase linear electronics. Now, as significant as that experience was, the most significant system I heard in the early 1970s came just a few months later during a visit to the now defunct Opus 1 chain founded by Tasso Spanos. Tin Ear Bob, you know who you are, and I made a trip to the Steel City one Saturday closer towards fall, primarily for Bob to shop for business attire. He had a corporate office gig and needed some new suits, but we had set aside plenty of time to swing by the flagship store on Smithfield Street in Pittsburgh, not far from that curious downtown geographical anomaly, the Point, that I described and talk about in episode 21. Now, Tasso's elegant prime store was, on first impression, somewhat intimidating, especially to a couple of 17-year-old stereo buffs. Originally a department store, the converted space sported a beautifully large and open area with a round carpeted performance area for live music and special audio demonstrations, some 20 feet or so in diameter, just inside the main entrance of this wonderfully unrestricted space. Remember, this was a store, not a nightclub or performance hall. And already, unlike other retail stores of its era, Tasso's shop had taken the game a step further. Around that whole open area were numerous systems set up in mock living spaces for demonstrations. And there were records, other tapes and things. It was a regular store, but it was so uniquely set up and so beautifully appointed. It was an amazing visit. It was just an amazing space. Now, once you became comfortable with the striking appearance of Tasso's facility, and comfortable was the word that described his store, the next thing you noticed at Opus 1 was the fact that you could not choose between 2 or more of the same type product at an identical price point. Tasso had adopted a simple philosophy. He and his staff listened to every receiver available that sold for, say, $250. Rather than confuse customers with pointless choices, he and his staff settled on one receiver, the best sounding one, at that given price point, period. That was the only one he put on his sales floor. The customer chose that one or another at a different quality level and price. It was a brilliant and highly consumer-friendly idea in 1973. And striking as the surroundings were, the most arresting element of the facility was the man behind this fabulous audio experience. As Tasso strode across his remarkable commercial space, his demeanor and carriage left no doubt that this was his stage. You were in Tasso's presence. His store was a theater. He was the star, and you were the person lucky enough to be a witness. In the 20 seconds or so he'd take to introduce himself, Tasso's soothing vocal cadence, reassuring poise, easygoing character, and utter confidence combined to yield one commanding presence. This man was a character in a play, not just the owner of a retail store. And more than a few of my many conversations with Tasso over the years visiting this unique shop, they were always informative and giving. For instance, when I asked him how he decided on the pieces he chose to offer his clientele, his explanation was obvious, clear, and logical. I've carried it with me to this day. He started by recalling that he had once wanted to buy his wife a fur coat, but couldn't afford a real fur. His only option was to choose among the so-called fun furs, the synthetic copies, priced more reasonably. At that moment, it dawned on him that he knew nothing about furs, real or otherwise. So some education would be necessary if he were going to be able to pick a fur that didn't look like what it was, a fake. So what should he do? Well, Tasso decided that he would visit real furriers. He went from store to store, examining real furs, how they were stitched, cut, and assembled, how they hung and felt. After he had spent enough time learning about the real thing, he started his pursuit for a synthetic fur. Armed with his knowledge of the genuine article, he searched until he found one that most closely approximated a real fur coat. He said that most of his wife's friends never knew it was not real. It is the same with music, Tasso told me. If you've never heard a real piano or violin live, right in front of you, how can you judge whether a stereo system is doing an adequate job of recreating them? That is how I select which products we represent here. The one in each price point that is as close to that reality as possible is the only one we offer our customers, period. I got to tell you, to hear such clear insight was like being struck by a bolt of lightning. I mean, doubtless, many of us know what Tasso told me that day so long ago. But at the time, as a 17-year-old, his insight was revelatory. With colossal impact, Tassos Manos imparted an amazing lesson, and his young disciple had an epiphany as the audio salesman entrepreneur had shared a completely overlooked point of view. How obvious, how correct, how simple. And while I'll share a story about hearing a mind-blowing demonstration of the Advent 201 cassette deck that Tasso conducted in that store with you sometime, that day we encountered something a little different. On this particular Saturday, as we entered the store, I noticed a gentleman had set up some electronics, a turntable and some speakers on that 20-foot diameter carpeted and open demo space. Playing what I first mistook to be a pair of modified quads, I was very surprised that while offering that familiar sense of coherence and mid-range purity, there was real bass extension and impact, shimmering treble extension, and the most refined and detailed sense of sound staging and imaging I had ever heard. I really think it was the first time I was aware. My first thought was, what the hell had he done to these quads? Now, of course, it was none other than the remarkable John Dahlquist demonstrating his game-changing and wildly influential DQ-10 loudspeakers, the first dynamic speaker to use multiple drivers in an open baffle, save for the 10-inch woofer, which was in a sealed box, in a time-aligned array. Now, many people are unaware that 3 years after Saul Morantz sold his name and company to Superscope Incorporated, he discovered another great talent, a man who was obsessed with designing the perfect speaker. The man was an engineer from the aerospace industry, and the man who had played a key role in the development of the lunar landing module for NASA and the Apollo space program. His name was John Dahlquist. And after a quick meeting, Saul saw something in John and subsequently bought into a partnership at 49% ownership after hearing the prototype DQ-10s. Now, the original DQ-10s had a 10-inch CTF woofer manufactured by Chicago Telephone Supply. But for a number of reasons, it didn't satisfy John's needs, and there is some speculation that it couldn't be supplied in large enough quantities, and perhaps fell out of production. Now, these were all installed in DQ-10s with serial numbers below 2000, and all made primarily before 1974. Now, technically, DQ-10s made after that number were called DQ-10A and incorporated the more widely known and preferred 10-inch woofer used in Henry Close's larger Advent. Man, it was a long excursion 10-inch woofer, built because Close could not find an existing suitable 10-inch long excursion driver. But being who he was, he had one built to his specifications, using a 12-inch deep basket frame and employing a masonite ring fabricated to close the gap between a 10-inch cone and a frame designed for a 12-inch cone driver. Guys, in total, 55,000 DQ-10s were manufactured, or 27,500 pairs. Now, keep in mind, almost all speakers were sold and priced as each at that time. And every part of the crossover was assembled in-house as well. But I'm here to tell you, it was a stunning experience. Their extraordinary imaging and sound staging, their clarity, their speed, their dynamic expressiveness, their coherence, their separation, and bass impact set them apart from the maddening crowd of other speakers in 1973 and for many years to come. As the first commercially available dynamic speaker to employ multiple drivers in an open baffle configuration, again, except for the acoustic suspension woofer, which were staggered for proper time alignment and phase coherence, their ability to realize the openness and freedom from boxiness that John had so deeply prized in the original quad ESL 57s, they leveraged the strengths of dynamic drivers to realize much deeper bass and a degree of dynamic expression that simply crushed the quad, while closely matching its coherence and tonal balance. In fact, their physical resemblance, remember I said they looked like quads, to the ESL 57 was, while somewhat driven by the design, was also an intentional homage by John. Now, while I freely admit that it was far from flawless, I mean, it was particularly power-hungry among its other weaknesses, it was clearly a groundbreaking design that preceded and had an enormous influence on dozens of other subsequent speakers from many later prominent houses like Bowers & Wilkins, Kef, Spica, Thiel, even Vandersteen and Wilson, an influence that I would argue continues to the present day. And in fact, very few large, full-range dynamic speakers before, and for some considerable time afterward, equaled its openness and spatial authenticity. But the revelations of my time in front of these speakers on that momentous day have been impossible to shake, and I've never looked back. Several times over the years, when I've been asked to point out the single event that shaped The Audio Analyst, my original print journal in the late 80s and early 90s, I've spoken of the day I first heard the DQ-10s. What did it for you? What were your unforgettable, maybe even pivotal listening experiences? Let me know. Let us all know. Put your comments in the comments section, won't you? I hope you found today's history lesson amusing and at least somewhat interesting. As always, thank you for taking the time to drop by and visit today. Remember to subscribe and to like and share your favorite episodes, as well as to post your comments and questions. Please stay safe in this most unusual of times and keep the music playing. Till next time, everybody. Cheers.